welcome back to the show where we illuminate the monsters and myths that will probably act as innovation blockers and obstacles on your innovation journey. Today's guest is Dr. Leda Glyptis, and I have seen Leda in many, many conferences. I met her years ago. I can't even remember when I met you, Leda. It was many years ago and our paths have crossed a lot. And more recently, I've been excited about Leda's Leda Writes series of newsletters that she pushes out every week. If you're not aware of them, sign up for them because you'll get honest to goodness truth about the things. She speaks her mind and isn't worried about sharing it. And so I was really, really excited to have you on the show today, Leda. Could you give a brief introduction, some context into the kind of roles that you've had in the past so that people can understand your involvement in innovation journeys before we dive into your monsters?
Absolutely. And first of all, thank you so much for having me. I have been drafting short lists and long lists of myths and monsters since we agreed to do this. And it's been a lot of fun doing it and actually reflecting on the things that have been repeated themes in what has been almost 2 decades in this journey. I am in many ways, as you've heard me say before, an accidental banker. I did not plan to do this. It was not a little girl's dream. But I fell sideways into a role with a very, very small startup before the sort of fintech wave caught on. There was only 5 of us. But we got very, very lucky. I'm sure that the founders would tell you we were very, very good. But we also got very, very lucky because we got a contract that meant we were embedded in Deutsche Bank, and we ended up learning so much. It was mostly middle office work, so where the grunt work of IT tends to happen. And then I moved from there to a corporate role in operations and IT, mostly business process transformation and revenue protection for BNY Mellon. I believe that's when we first met, actually, in my BNY Mellon days. Where I spent a lot of time in that transformation, revenue protection, fix the process, fix the governance, fix the tech, because the client might walk out the door. And then once you fixed it, see how that can service other clients like them. And very sensibly, actually, BNY Mellon took a step back and said, well, if we're doing that with existing clients and existing tech, why don't we do it with new tech? So I was moved to the innovation program with a dual mandate to change ways of working internally in the bank, but also in the European context to bring a lot of the discipline we had around revenue protection and doing something that felt almost like a pilot with a client and pushing it to production and rolling it out to other clients. Very, very nice, neat model. And that's how we launched the innovation program in EMEA. Obviously, the house wasn't on fire the same way, right? So some different behaviors applied. We'll talk about it. But it was a fantastic journey. And then I spent some time in the Middle East. I moved to Doha in Qatar, and I was the Chief Innovation Officer of Qatar National Bank, biggest bank in Middle East and Africa, with aspirations to expand its footprint in Asia. And for them, innovation was less about experimentation and more about citizenship. So similar work, different drivers. And then from there, I moved back to the UK. I served for 2 years as CEO of FS Foundry, which is a cloud native core banking and product configuration platform. It was a joint venture between a Norwegian bank and 11FS Group. And again, that's sort of applied innovation with intention of scale, different set of challenges. And now I do a series of board positions and consulting advisor positions, mostly with technology companies that have either achieved scale or aspirations of scale, and have realized that the way that the industry plays the startup game doesn't set the startup up for success, and things have to be done differently.
Interesting. So definitely a long and checkered history of innovation. And And interesting that you said you started compiling a list. Before I started the series, I had started putting a list together because my intention is to put this all together, package it, and bring it out as a book with advice. And I decided that I got to about 22 myths, monsters, and misconceptions, and I thought, yeah, I've got to find out from other people, are there more, or are these them, and consolidating the themes. But before we actually even dive into the monsters, what some people might think of a monster, and just because you had brought it up in a previous conversation, you seem to have a fascination with dinosaurs. Is that just because you work in banking? There's been lots of parallels drawn in there. What's your favorite dinosaur, and more importantly, why?
So it's I know we've had this conversation offline, but I have always really, really liked dinosaurs. And then about 10 years ago, somebody showed me a cartoon, which I've seen do the rounds, saying, growing up sucks. Nobody asks you what your favorite dinosaur is anymore. It's like they don't care. And I thought, what? I care. And I was with a group of friends, and we ended up having a conversation. And out of 10 of us, only 2 of us had a favorite dinosaur. And I was like, well, hold on. What happened between your childhood where everyone has a favorite dinosaur? And now, like, why did you stop caring? And I must admit that childish fascination with a world so different to the world as we know it, your first contact with tangible history, and just that depth perception of how the world can change, and that mind-blowing moment as a small child that thing that looks like it couldn't exist did exist, and therefore your imagination gets licensed to go crazy. I never lost that sense of absolute fascination with dinosaurs and just the shapes of what has been possible. And yes, I do have a favorite dinosaur. I do. It's the Ankylosaurus. It's the spiky one, which I had this.
Most people probably, I had to Google what an Ankylosaurus was.
But it's one that it's almost like it's wearing a crown on its forehead, and it looks aggressive, but it's almost like a rhinoceros with a crown almost. And I just found as a kid it looked really different, and it was very striking for me. Also in Greek, the first component of Ankylosaurus, Agilis, it would be a splinter, like something sharp, very, very small. And then you look at that and you're like, oh, misnomer. But yeah, I had this conversation with Ali Patterson a few years ago as part of an interview. And he said, I'm going to ask you a very important question now. And I was like, what is that going to be? What my favorite dinosaur is? And he was like, no. But what is your favorite dinosaur? So I told him it's the Ankylosaurus, and I explained it's the spiky one. And then Ali very cleverly used that conversation right at the end of the interview, and it reads really well, but it called the interview the spiky one with a picture of me, the spiky one. It's actually it is not untrue.
I was going to say that's probably going to be the title of this one as well. I tend to title the episodes like Friends episodes, the one with the spiky one. So
exactly.
And on that note, we'll dive in straight to, what is your first monster or myth, and have you given it a name?
Yes. So I have. I'll confess, I've made 4 separate lists, and the one I've ended up with is not. It's not the most comprehensive one, but I think it's the most ubiquitous one. And I try to manage it a little bit, but let me start with the monsters because they're a little bit funnier. The myths go a little bit deeper and I think are a bit closer to the bone, particularly if we have institutional listeners. My first monster is Milton Waddams. Have you seen Office Space?
Yes.
For any listeners who haven't, pause us, go watch it, come back. It's really worth it. It's worth it because you find yourself, your heart constricting as you watch it, because you're like, that was my life. Milton Waddams is, for me, the fastest way of describing to people what I mean, the view from your desk. And I have said this repeatedly to my own team, my own bosses, stakeholders, investors. But one of the most limiting things, and what is a monster if not something that blocks your way, right? Something that scares you into not moving forward. The view from your desk is the worst monster. And Milton Waddams is this character that is so attached to the detail of his day-to-day life, including his red stapler, that he will be a bad colleague and a bad employee to hold on to that familiarity. And of course, he's a caricature. But I think if we take that more widely, the view from our desk is one of the most limiting factors. And what do I mean by that? I remember when Stellar first came out, the company that creates collateralized assets for people who don't have assets to banking and access to banking. So a collateralized goat, a way of borrowing against your future crops in a sharecropping setting without a bank being involved. And I remember talking to my bosses in the bank at the time and them going, how did they even think about that? I remember saying to them, because it's not important to them that a bank exists. Whereas you sit here in this building and it's impossible to imagine the world without a custody bank, without, and that goes even further. I had an incredible boss. Like I've had some terrible bosses. I've had some incredible bosses. One of my best bosses was a guy called Varun Ramprasad. And I remember he flew over from New York and he said, I'm here. What do you need me to see? What do you need me to learn? What do you need me to understand? What do you need me to do? Absolutely inspired, right? How many bosses ask you that?
That's a fantastic boss.
I know. He was an incredible boss. He was he was supportive. He was nurturing, like hands down, the best boss I've ever had. And so we went, I worked him to the ground, poor man, because we had 36 locations in Europe and I wanted him to see as many as possible to see the difference. So we get to Cork and BNY Mellon had a world-leading fund accounting operations office in Cork. And I mean, the guys were brilliant. We tried to do operational redesign and we couldn't get efficiencies of more than a second per day per team. They were streamlined, they were good. So we get out of the cab and Varun's office was at the time on #1 Wall Street in New York. And he had come to London, and we're in Cork now. And this is a world-leading office. The work they do is stellar. We get out of the cab and the office is behind us, beautiful office, but it's in this park, like retail park. And I say to Varun, turn around, what do you see? He started laughing. He like, cows. It's like, right, cows. Because the office was outside Cork in a very rural part of Ireland. And I was like, okay, like there is no metaphor here. I just need you to remember how diverse our experiences are and how far away New York is from these guys who do stellar work. And it became a shorthand for the next few years when we worked together, because we'd be like, you know, are we blind? Is our perspective right? If we're trying to take a new offering to the market, are we blinded by the view from our desk because the walls around you are so solid? And the cows are a joke, but at the same time, they're not. Because can you really reimagine your offering? How much of what you currently do can you imagine the world not having? How much of what you do, forget your organization. And I think my first monster is Milton Waddams, the view from your desk.
And that really resonates with me. When I first got into financial services, I'd come from a very diverse background, and I've had an even more diverse going forward after leaving financial services. But the thing that struck me, I'd come out of FMCG, media, online publishing, oil and gas, a whole lot of different industries. And I would constantly be looking for inspiration across industries. And when I got to financial services, in my role that I had at the time, I had put forward an application, permission to attend a conference on retail, right? It was retail and consumer goods and things like that. And from the top, the rejection came back and said, that's not a financial services conference. Why are you going? And I
Why do
turned
you want
around.
to learn things? What's wrong with you?
Well, I turned around and I went, who do you think uses our damn products? And if all you ever go to in this organization is financial services events. You're in an echo chamber where everybody's patting themselves on the back about how great everything is, without opening up your eyes to a worldview of everything else that's going around there. And at that particular time, the organization didn't even have relationships or connections with the end customer, the person, the people, or the organizations that were actually using and implementing payment methods and methodologies. They only had relationships with other financial institutions. It was astonishing to me.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
sort of, it's a different take on the view from your desk. And I think your particular caricature there, that's a lot about resistance to change and not wanting things to be different to the way it is at the moment, particularly the stapler. So that's
I
a
bet he doesn't have a favorite dinosaur though.
that's a brilliant one to start off with. What's your next one?
So my next one, I haven't given a name to. I have called it actually CCing every man and his dog, but it is about fear of accountability. And one of the most crippling things I have seen in the industry, and sadly, it seems to happen in big organizations that can afford to take risks, it happens more. You know those emails that you get when you're working with big corporates and where you're working in big corporates where there's 78 people on CC. And actually there was my best friend works for one of the biggest banks in the world. He sent me these hilarious comments about a week ago because there was a reply all incident. And there were hundreds of people. And then there were all these hilarious responses that were also reply all to be removed from the list. But that comedy aside, that's not what I'm thinking of. Is
it's
that
what I call cover my ass emails.
Yes, it's the cover my ass emails. And actually they come in two flavors. They come in the cover my ass emails and the look at me working hard emails.
Oh, yes.
The second variety tend to come at 11 o'clock at night or on a Sunday afternoon. And I bet you they've been timed. And it's a testament of culture. And we'll get to that in the myths as well. But it's a testament of culture. It's a testament of organizations that either discourage accountability or don't expect it. Because I found myself having this conversation with my good boss, some bad bosses as well, but also my own teams over the years, the function of the CC. And my best bosses and my own teams, I'd like to think, had a clear understanding of if I CC you, it's because I need you to know this bit of information because it's relevant to whatever you need to do next, because I need you to do something. Or because I need the client to see that we are all informed. These are the functions of the CC. Other than that, it starts raising questions. And again, when I was thinking about myths and monsters, because of course I have a little OCD, so it's like, well, is this a myth or is this a monster? I put under monsters those things that block us from doing things, and under myths, the stories we tell ourselves that allow us to do things a certain way. And whether that's right or wrong, that's kind of how I divided things. And that CCing every man and his dog went in there because it's funny and it is true. And I'll tell you one example. When I was at one of the banks, I had a BlackBerry. And it was part of the security policy of the bank not to put the BlackBerry on Wi-Fi. It was always on the network. And I went on holiday and I got to the hotel and I called my boss, the same one, all the good stories, that guy. I say, Varun, I have zero reception where I am. What do you want me to do? Do you want me to get exemption to put it on the network? Do you want to like keep an eye on my emails and call me? Shall I check in with you once a week? Shall I go once a day, even whatever? Shall I go? And he was like, you should take a holiday. Put your BlackBerry in your suitcase. Like the world will not end without you. Hate to say it to you, it'll be fine. If I need you, I have your personal number, I'll call you, but I'm not going to need you because we're not surgeons. And he was right. He didn't need me. However, as and it was one of the most relaxing holidays I've ever taken because I had no choice but not to work.
Perfect holiday, actually.
As the cab crests the hill and I get back onto the network, my little red light of doom, do you remember that from when you had a BlackBerry, starts blinking, and it blinked solidly all the way to the airport. I had 6,500 emails.
Oh my jeez.
I stayed with BNY Mellon for another, I want to say, year and a half, if not longer after that, before I took my next role. And I manage my inbox aggressively because I treat it like my to-do list. So before that time, and since that time, I've never had more than 20, 30 emails in my inbox at any one time. I didn't manage to get my inbox to below 600. When I left, there were still emails I hadn't gotten around to because the CC thing.
Yeah.
Now, out of those emails, I would say that I was the primary recipient for a fraction. I needed to have visibility of for, say, half. I'm being generous. And then the rest were either the watch me work emails or the I don't know who needs to know, so I'm going to cover my ass. And I think, and I'm not, this is not a sort of indictment of BNY Mellon, because actually BNY Mellon, I use it as an example because it's one of the best places I've ever worked in terms of its culture, its openness, it's corporate, it's heavily regulated, it's distributed. So if you have, like in EMEA, we had 36 locations in EMEA alone. That's without counting APAC and the Americas. It is difficult to not over rely on email. So I use them as an example because if that happens with the good guys, imagine what happens in organizations that have a heavy blame culture. But accountability becomes a problem then. And I think that's my monster.
So what's the solution to it? What would you suggest people do to conquer this monster? Because I mean, email overload, we've got at the moment, particularly seen that the world has changed and the majority of those knowledge workers that are now working remotely. Reliance on email is so much more. I mean, I'm a sole person working by myself, and I'm beginning to feel overwhelmed by the amount of email because people are over communicating on an email channel, and a lot of that, I would prefer different channels. What's your suggestion? How do we conquer this monster? Is it a cultural thing? Is it a tools and technology thing? Is this a employee education thing? What is it? How do we overcome this? What's your suggestion for people to go, just, this is how you get rid of this?
It's a very good question. And I think it doesn't have an easy answer. And I would say the answer is threefold, right? The first one is strategy. And I know it sounds a bit random, but if people know what we're trying to achieve, if they know what their own responsibility is, if they know what good looks like, and they know what an old colleague of mine, Ben, used to call the so that. He used to be in the army. He used to say that for a soldier to do his job well, he needs to know so that. You're guarding this bridge so that the bridge stays safe because it's important. The village on the far end stays safe because the humans are important, so that the metal of the bridge is not captured by the enemy. Those three scenarios have very, very different courses of action if push comes to shove and you can't save the bridge. And he gave me this example, the bridge is his example. He gave me this example like 15 years ago, and it has really stayed with me. It's not enough for people knowing what they have to achieve. They need to know what we're willing to compromise should it come to that. So I think if people have clear strategic direction, what are we trying to do? What does good look like? What is our so that? What do we not compromise on? And what are you empowered to do and why? Sometimes I've had to sit down with my team members and go, this particular set of decisions may look like it's a product decision, but actually it affects our pricing. So don't make that decision on your own, right? They need to know that. So I think strategy contextualization, what the good looks like, what we're prepared to give up, is the first way of doing that, right? Because if one of the reasons why people do that is they're not clear what the full picture is. So they're CCing people who have the full picture. I get that. I've done this in the past. When you're like, yeah, for my piece of the world, I can sign off on this, but I don't know what's going on either side. So if I did, I would make this decision. I think that's the first thing. The second is a culture of accountability, which is, it is culture, but it goes beyond that. It's a choice. It's a leadership choice, because if I say to my team, only CC me if you need me, that implies I trust them to make the choice. And I also allow for a margin of error. You will not always get it right. You might think you don't need me, but then the next thing I think is, once you've got the strategy in place and you have the right leadership in place, it's about habit and tolerance. So you create the habit by creating low tolerance for bad behavior and high tolerance for good behavior, right? So for instance, I discourage my teams from sending those look at me working emails at 11 o'clock at night. But I encourage them to send emails that share the platform. So if you have an email that says, Andrew did a great job, CC everyone. If you have an email that says, these are the 3 things that are my job and I did them, but I want everyone to see that it's 11 o'clock on a Tuesday and I'm still working, then discourage that. So I think but it has to be done in that order. People need to have the tools to make those decisions with confidence and consistency. They need to have leadership that allows them to make those decisions and trust their own guidance and their own hiring. And then that leadership to not tolerate bad behavior and mark it as bad behavior. And then, you can unlearn the bad habits, but it starts with strategy. It's places where people don't necessarily know what good is, that they want to, as you say, cover their ass just in case the world changes overnight.
Excellent. No, I think a lot of that is around culture, and we've been speaking about culture as well. It's culture, leadership values, that kind of a thing. I mean, what you're describing there is 100%. When I was in corporate, it was empowering the people below you to understand their parameters of decision making, but also giving them the confidence that if they messed up, I was the one who was going to take the blame, because I was the one who gave them that latitude. And I never ever burned any of my employees if they made a decision that perhaps turned out in retrospect not to be the right decision to be made. I didn't throw them under a bus. I said, well, that's on me, because I gave them that latitude to be able to do that. And I think that also builds up confidence in leadership when your employees know, well, actually, it's okay to get some things wrong. Look, there's a hard line that you say right up front. When it's this kind of a decision, you absolutely, that needs to be collaborative, or you need to involve me. But if it's these kind of decisions, it's up to you. And I'm going to trust you. I hired you, and I've got you doing that role. And I think that's very much a cultural and leadership thing. And I think, sadly, there's still a lot of an old culture that pervades, particularly in the kind of financial institutions that you and I have worked in, where it's not like that at all. Hence the cover my arse emails that come up all the time. Yeah. Let's get on to another monster or myth, or whichever.
I've got you another monster, and then I have 3 myths. I balanced it. So my last monster, I call it the can opener. I gave it a name, and I call it the can opener because I wrote an article as part of my blog a good few years ago called Can Openers and Influencers, or something along those lines. And it was a piece that, at the time, I thought a lot of my influencer friends would be upset, but actually they were very vocally supportive, which I was both surprised and elated about, because my piece was about both the hell's an influencer? You know what I mean? Like your number of Twitter followers doesn't really say anything about who's listening to you. They can hear you, but they're not necessarily listening. But it was more to the point that usefulness is about usability and timing. And part of what I was talking about in that piece was the fact that I have personally worked in organizations, and I know people who have had exactly the same experience, where you would be celebrated by the industry as an expert in something, rightly or wrongly. But if you're working in a corporate, it's usually rightly, because you're so constrained by company compliance and legal that you don't have the bandwidth to build up a reputation for being an influencer without any substance. What you usually end up doing is fronting the work you have done and getting a limited sort of name for yourself as someone who knows, robotics really well because you've done X number of implementations. So for better or worse, you have a reputation for hard-earned expertise. And usually you're celebrated for that expertise by the industry way before your company. But even when you get to the point where you're hired for that expertise, you will find yourself in situations where it's happened to me a lot, and I know at least 3 other people that this exact thing has happened to. You come back from a meeting going, what was I doing there? Or you've been given a project and you're like, I don't know anything about data centers. And somebody is in the queue for their lunch or their coffee before you with the same face. You go, what's up with you? And they go, I've just been landed with a project to do X, or I've just been dragged to talk to a client about X. And it's something that you have expertise in, and they're despairing because they don't know anything about it. And it's happened to me a lot. It's happened to friends a lot. I'm pretty sure it's happening inside organizations all the time. Meanwhile, I have a lot of friends and acquaintances who are bona fide influencers, people who have immense reach and knowledge. And some of them are often contacted for things that are really not what they're known for. I don't know anything about this. But equally, some of them are like, well, why do I have all these invitations to speak, but no invitation to work? And I've called it can openers because, like that specialist can opener you have, but you never remember you have it when you need to open the tin, or you can't find it when you open the tin. It is, I think we're obsessed. The fintech industry is obsessed with a particular type of visibility. And I'm being cautious and careful because I've enjoyed some of that visibility, and it has been a gift. It has allowed me access to people who have been inspiring and have taught me things. So I am not against it, but I do wonder what we learned from all those lists of influencers and, the people to watch. It's like saying can openers are amazing, but never thinking about the cans. I think there is, it's a monster because we kind of stopped before we finished the thought. I don't think there's anything wrong with celebrating people whose knowledge and opinion carries weight. I actually think as we move into a knowledge economy, that's a habit we need to get into. Measuring it in terms of Twitter followers is a little bit questionable, but then your reach is important, right? If you have a voice, your reach is important. But what's the point of having something if you don't know how to use it? So I consider it a monster because I really think that there are a lot of folks out there whose names are household names for our industry, but the things they have to say are not necessarily absorbed.
Yeah, so it's about using the wrong tool for the job, or having the right tool but not using it in the right way.
That's right. Or getting excited about the tool but then not using it at all.
Not applying it in the right way. Yes, yeah. We've got one of these, but actually not using it to its full benefit.
I was told, sorry to interrupt you, I was told by a prospective employer once, I said, what is your strategy around X? And they said, well, if you take this job, you. And I was like, what? And he said, oh, yeah, you'll be the canary in the mine. And I was like, okay, so essentially you're telling me I'm signing up for a a time of frustration until such a time as you decide that, me banging my head against the brick wall and early warnings lead you to finally do something. And they're like, yeah, we just don't want to not know.
Interesting point. And when you came to the influencer lists, I mean, it's not just the fintech industry. Every industry has these sort of, he has the top 10 influencers in this, and he has the top 10 influencers in that. And I always ask myself, with no disrespect to the people that are on them, because some of the people that are on them, I think, really deserve to be on them. When I see some of the influencer lists and I go, yes, what that person has said or done has actually influenced my way of thinking. That to me is an influencer. There is an outcome. But so many of them, I think, what
Who are
action, what came about from the stuff that they said? They got up, they spurted a whole lot of stuff that seems to have been regurgitated from a whole lot of analysts. But so what? And I always ask this, so what? It's one of my mantras. I've got this thing that I go around saying, what, so what, and now what?
Oh, I
Um,
like that.
and yeah, it's part of a whole session that I coach. Actually, it's my methodology for picking up on trends and things. Is when I identify things, I say, what's going on? So what are the impacts and implications? And now what should we be doing about it?
I
And
love that.
and I always, when I look at the influencers, I go, so what? You have a huge Twitter following or a huge Instagram, or you've got 10 million subscribers on YouTube, or everybody's reading all the stuff that you put out. So what? Whose life have you changed? And I'm nowhere near in the big leagues like you guys and all of you on the influencer lists, but I get a tremendous amount of pleasure when I get one single person coming back to me and said, I read this in your book and it really made me think. And as a result, I did this. And if it wasn't for that one single thought, I had a conversation yesterday with a guy and he went, I opened up, my book is just it's a book of quotes with short stories and anecdotes, but every single one is accompanied with a provocation. And he said, he had read his quote of the day kind of thing. He's got a habit. He just picks up, flicks open, looks in. And he said he read it. And because of my particular provocation in this case, he went, that's made me think. And he phoned me up and he said, I've changed my actions because of that. I just wanted you to know, because I don't think probably people don't tell you. And that to me, I love that. And I don't classify myself as an influencer in any way, shape or form, but little things like that just give me an immense amount of pleasure, because I think, that achieved the desired outcome of what I had set out to achieve. Somebody changed their actions. There was a so what. That's my
I,
version.
I totally agree with that. And I think what you're sort of nudging me towards, and I totally agree with, is that maybe influencer is the wrong term. And I was actually discussing this with people whose names like on every list, someone like a Brett, which is is it about influence? Is it about challenge? I think it's a bit of both, right? So I think there's an element of a misnomer, because a lot of these people are challengers. They're pushing us to think differently. But I did a session with a client a few years ago now, and they wanted me because they had heard me speak. They knew that I would challenge them. They had read my stuff. They had seen me on a list. So I did a session and I did exactly what they asked for. I showed them why certain things they were doing were not sustainable, and how, and we'll talk to some of the myths soon, how some of the choices they thought they had, they didn't actually have. And in the end of the day, they said, this has been eye-opening. And what we've learned is we lack the courage to make the choices you say we have to make. It's one of the most frustrating days of my career. With hindsight, one of the most unusual as well, because not many CEOs stand in front of their board and group of directors and say that. But if influencing is the exam question, then I failed. But if being truthful and saying it like it is and giving people a chance to be challenged and do something, then I succeeded. So maybe what I'm trying to say is we need to think about what the job is, hence the can opener. At the end of the day, big organizations' decisions get challenged more by, influenced more by regulatory trends and what their competitors are doing than by what someone like Brett King or Chris Skinner would say. But does that mean that what they say isn't molding the framework and what the conversations are and should be? Absolutely not. So my monster is that very often you're like, well, I had someone important come to talk at a company conference and now I'm done. Whereas the reality is, no, you're using it for the wrong thing. They're not there to tick that box because they were on that list. It's become a very innocuous word. They're here to shake you up.
Yeah.
And maybe you won't listen to everything they say immediately, but they are here to give you sleepless nights. That's the job. And if that is the job, they're doing it very well, actually. It's just that we're not listening very well, which kind of leads me to my myths.
So I'm going to stop you there for a section, because actually, if you have the time, we're going to do this as a two-part. So from the recording perspective for both the podcast and the video, I'm going to do part one as this one, and I'm going to then do a part two to cover your myths, if you have the time to go through your myths now, because this is absolutely fantastic. So from a recording perspective, I'm going to say goodbye to part one and goodbye to Leda, and we're going to restart with part two. So